Howdy. Do I look all right? I'm at Patterson Park. Different gazebo than I was at before. It's been a cool day. I walked here this morning, put in my mile. It's probably 68, 70. Then, I'm not sure what it is now. Probably about the same, maybe a little warmer. It's been a nice day, a lot of fun. There's some folks here fishing. I don't know how much luck they're having, but they are fishing. Trying to get this thing set right. I left off with the beginning of first grade. The rest of first grade was fairly uneventful. Just, for the most part, me being bored, and reading ahead, understanding what was going on, reading in the reader. Towards the end of the year, I started drawing. Had flat paper and pencils, crayons. I would draw airplanes and army men, that sort of thing. When I started second grade, I was in Mrs. Holderman's class to begin with. And she had a daughter that was my age, whose name was Martha, and she was in the same class. Why they put mother and daughter in the same class, I don't know. Maybe they thought it was for the best, but at any rate, Martha took a liking to me. And I was her boyfriend, and she was my girlfriend. And she told me that, so we would hold hands during recess, hold hands going to lunch, talk about nonsense. What do 2-year-olds talk about anyway? Or not 2-year-olds, second graders. What do second graders talk about anyway? But there were a few times, and I don't recall why Mrs. Holderman did it, but I think both of us were ahead of the rest of the class. And she would send the two of us out to sit under an oak tree not far from the classroom door and take our readers and read. Of course, I read ahead in second grade just like I did in first. Mrs. Shields had warned Miss Holderman that I would read ahead, that she needed to keep an eye on me, but I did anyway. The particulars I remember are the fact that she told me I was her boyfriend and that she was my girlfriend, and that's just the way it was. So that's the way it was. And she was a cute girl and real friendly, real outgoing. We got along real well together. And then I think it was during the Thanksgiving holidays, and her mother was either divorced or widowed, I'm not sure which, but for the Thanksgiving holidays they were traveling somewhere to visit with relatives and were involved in a car wreck. And I don't know if her mother was killed in the wreck or just severely injured in the wreck. I don't think anybody at school ever made that plain to us. But we were told that Martha wouldn't be coming back, and that they didn't know, they didn't give us any details about Mrs. Holderman, but Martha was going to stay with one of her aunts and finished school wherever it was. I don't know where the other city was. But I never saw Martha again or heard from her since. But I also had to change teachers because Mrs. Holderman was no longer there. So Mrs. House became my teacher. And she had a son my age named Ray. And he was also in second grade, but he was not in Ms. Howe's classroom. He was in another classroom. But he and I became buddies. We'd get into arguments and almost fights, and sometimes on the playground during recess, they would separate us and have us sit and lean against the wall about 50 feet apart for the rest of recess because we couldn't stop arguing about something. But over the years, we became fast friends. Ray was probably one of my best friends ever. He had some mental problems. He was later diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And as long as he stayed on his medication, he was coping with it, but he wouldn't stay on his medication. He'd been in and out of the mental health facility in DeSoto County down south a number of times during school. But he kept up with his schoolwork, so when he'd come back, he'd always come back to the same grade. And his mother was divorced. And she had also been told that I would read ahead. And I didn't pay a lot of attention in class. And I found, she told me, this was at Ray's funeral a few years ago. Ray had liver cancer, and he died early 2000s. And I saw her at Ray's funeral. First time I'd seen her in many, many years. And evidently I was one of her favorite students. When we had gone after the services, we went out to Graveside. After Graveside, I was just talking with Ms. House. She was sitting under a shade tree, and people were coming to her and speaking to her. And one of the things she said to me was, trying to remember how she put it. She said, "I've always said that's the smartest thing that ever came out of Fort Meade," and looking at me when she said it. And she talked about how I would be not paying attention in class. I'd be drawing pictures, airplanes, army men, whatever, but I wouldn't be paying attention. And she said that she would say to herself, "I've got him now." And she'd ask me a question pertinent to whatever lesson she was teaching. She said, "And you always had the right answer. I never got you at that." She said, "So I let you draw." You were keeping up, so I let you go with it. But when Ray and I were all through the rest of elementary on into junior high, we visited back and forth. He'd come over to my house, I'd go over to his house. His mom would fix the snacks. We'd have a good time, play all manner of games. She's a real sweet lady. Lost my train of thought. There's folks walking in the park nearby. I think they wanted to come up on the gazebo and saw me. But after second grade, in third grade, Mrs. Rebender was my teacher, and she was also a neighbor. She lived next door to the house that we were to move to when I was around 12, so which was right around the corner from where we lived on First Street. And she loved to fish. That was her life's joy. And she would take me and Ray. She was also a friend of Mrs. Howe's. She'd take Ray and I fishing with her, and we'd go. First, we'd go dig worms, because she only wanted to fish with fresh worms. So we'd go dig worms, and we always fished in little creeks or little ponds here and there, and we'd fish for bluegill and occasionally speckled perch. But it would be a day. It'd be a day-long event. We'd have packed sandwiches for lunch, and have plenty of water to drink, and probably a soft drink to have with lunch when we ate. And no fish was too small. She kept them all. We'd catch little brim, smaller than your hand. My hand when I was in the third grade, but she cleaned them all and fried them up. Of course, she'd share with us too. We get to eat some fried fish with her. But she didn't care about the reading ahead. She knew I was going to do it, and she just let me go with it. And she didn't care about me drawing in class. That was already my reputation, I guess. But we got into the multiplication tables and division and multiplication, all that sort of stuff, and the other social studies parts of the curriculum. And I had a good time in her class. And during third grade, I broke my right arm again, just above the healed break from before I'd started first grade. Me, my brother, and a friend of his were at the city park, which was next to the library, and we were trying to see who could jump the farthest from a swing high and fast and jump out, and we would mark our distance. Of course, the playground was mostly just sand, so we just draw a big line in the sand on your distance. And trying to get further than either of those, I swung, and I jumped from the swing too high in the arc. And instead of distance, I got elevation. And then I slowly rolled forward. I couldn't keep my feet under me, and landed on my knees and elbows. And my right elbow dug into the ground, and the upper bone in my right arm broke just above the previous break. And we had to walk home. And they were making fun of me. They didn't realize my arm was broken, but at first I was crying, and then they were making fun of me, and I got mad, so I crossed the street and I walked on the opposite side of the street from where they were walking. But we walked home, and Mom figured out my arm was broken. She'd seen it before, so it was starting to swell. So she and my dad took me to the emergency room again. They x-rayed, confirmed it was broken, said it was broken right above the previous break. They set it and put me back in a cast, and back to school I went. This was early in third grade, because during recess we were playing football. We were playing flag football. We called it ragtag, but flag football. But I was a lineman, and I could block with that cast real good. I would throw it out in front, and it was hitting the other guy with something hard, so I could always open a hole for the running back. Even though I wasn't anywhere near the size of the other guys, I was kind of a run. But I wasn't all that short. I was just real skinny. But I remember using that cast for a blocking device. Third grade was fun too. The same people that I wound up going to high school with we were all in the same grade, in different classes, but all in the same grade. And a couple, we'd meander between classes as we shifted up through elementary school. So we all had some classes together throughout our school careers. In fourth grade, I had Mrs. Mayo. And she was my second wife, Anne. Of course, I didn't know that at the time, but she was. And I wouldn't wear shoes to school. I would get to the corner right before the school grounds. I'd take my shoes off and put them in the fork of a low branching oak. I could just reach it, but I'd hide them up there, maybe cover them with moss or something. And then after school, on the way back home, I'd take them out of the tree and put them back on. And several weeks into the school year, one Saturday, Ms. Mayo came driving up in front of the house. And I knew who she was, and Mom had met her early in the, first year, part of the school year. But she came up, and I remember she didn't even come up on the porch. She just stood there with one foot on the walk and the other one on the bottom step. And she was asking my mom if she could take me to buy me some shoes. And my mom said, "He has shoes." And Ms. Mayo said, "I've never seen him in shoes. He's always barefoot in school." And my mom gave me a look. She said, "What have you been doing with your shoes?" And she told Ms. Mayo, "He leaves here wearing shoes and he comes home wearing shoes." And she asked me, "What have you been doing with your shoes?" So I told her I'd been hiding them in the tree. So now Ms. Mayo knew I had shoes, so I had to wear shoes. A lot of the playground games were the same. We'd play tag, follow the leader, marbles, a lot of marbles. Everybody loved to play marbles. All the boys anyway loved to play marbles. And one of the school rules was you couldn't play for keeps. You had to give the other player his marbles back at the end of the game. After school, if we had a marble game, we'd always play for keeps. But they wouldn't let us do that on the school ground. But elementary school was a lot of fun. In the fifth grade, I had Mrs. Lindsay. She was the mother-in-law of the postmaster for the post office here in Fort Meade. And she got ill about the middle of the school year. I don't know if I was ever told what ailed her, what was wrong with her, but she was she didn't return to school. I think she took retirement or early retirement or whatever. But like I say, I don't remember what the ailment was, other than she was too sick to come back to work. So we had a series of substitutes for the rest of 5th grade. And one of the substitutes, I remember we were doing a math portion of the school day, and she didn't have an understanding of the difference between area and perimeter. And she kept talking about it, explaining it incorrectly. And I was trying to, I would interrupt her and tell her that wasn't right, and she was not really caring for my impudence. But she wouldn't, I couldn't convince her. And I asked her if I could come to the board, and she wouldn't let me do that. So I took my math book and I picked up about 5 other math books from my classmates. I walked to the front of the class and laid the books down on the floor and made them the shape of a rectangle. And I said, we'll pretend these are square feet. And I counted out the area, and then I counted off the perimeter, and then I moved 2 of the books. I had them like 3 by 3, and I moved 2 of the books and took them out of the shape that I had, and it reduced the area and reduced the perimeter, but not in the same way. And she finally got the idea of what I was saying, but she told me to go back to my desk and not to do that anymore. So I didn't get in severe trouble with it, but I think I had to go visit the principal over it. And the principal agreed that I had the right idea of area and perimeter, but I should not be interrupting class. So I tried to protest that she was teaching us all wrong, but no, I wasn't supposed to interrupt class. So lesson learned. In the 6th grade, first part of the year, we had Mrs. Watts. And then in the middle of the year, I think the junior and senior class, the English teacher that taught junior and senior English, one of the English teachers, left or got sick or something, but Mrs. Watts got promoted to that position. So Mr. Shaver came in and took her place for the rest of the 6th grade. And the 6th grade was taught in the high school, but the class changing that went on with the junior high and high school, we hear people and see people, because there were windows into the hallway, see people changing classes, and that was somewhat of a distraction, but not too bad. But finished 6th grade finally, and was out of elementary school. And I think that'll be enough for now. That'll do.